It's a pleasure to be here. And hi, everybody. So I'm Dr. Lusi Morhayim. I'm an assistant professor in social sciences of the built environment at Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction at University College London. My background is in architecture, and my research focuses on user needs in the built environment, whether it is behavioral, psychological, or cultural needs. And I also look into how the built environment can be designed and planned to meet these needs better. So my recent projects focus on health and vulnerable groups, such as examining sociospatial needs of older cancer patients in cancer clinics, and connections between walkability and loneliness in low-income areas for older residents. Some of my earlier work includes post-occupancy evaluations in various building types and studies about urban health with the more politics of space and right to the city angles, such as looking into grassroots public demands for car-free cities and for sustainable, healthy, and livable urban spaces. So I'm going to talk about today environmental psychology, or sometimes we refer to it as environment and behavior field, within which I conduct the research, the kind of research I do. So what is environmental psychology? An often used quote in environmental psychology comes from not an academic in the field, but from Winston Churchill. He once said, "We shape our buildings, and thereafter they shape us." So many people refer to this quote in this field because it acknowledges this indisputable relationship between people and the environment. Environmental psychology, in essence, asks how environments influence people, and that is different groups of people, and how people understand and respond to and shape their environments. So this implies that the interaction between people and their environment is a two-way relationship. Both environments influence people and people influence their environment. And this premise on its own offers a lot of specialized research areas to cover. So we are talking about a very broad and truly interdisciplinary field in its nature. It is interdisciplinary because the field borrows theories and research methods from psychology, sociology, human factors, anthropology, cultural geography, cognitive sciences, neurosciences, like you just heard in the previous lecture, and combines these perspectives with the built environment knowledge in examining anything about the human aspect of the built environment. That includes the social aspects, cultural aspects, as much as behavioral and psychological aspects. Another important thing to note is perhaps that environmental psychology started as an academic field in 1960s. This focus on built environment was largely guided by the political and social context of the time, responding to post-war housing, poverty, justice, and equality challenges. And the civil rights movements, social awareness, and unrest likely influenced the research agendas and the findings. So therefore, as much as the direct focus on psychology topics, including cognition, behavior, perception, and attitudes, there has always been a focus on vulnerable groups, culture, society, sustainability, pro-environmental behavior, and politics of space. Another important aspect has been giving voice and agency to people, examining the extent and limits of agency in shaping their environments, and also conceptualization of users as an expert and primary source for design knowledge has been some of the underlying characteristics of this of the research in this field. So many scholars that work with the similar approach, research interest, and research methods also refer to this now much broader field as people-environment relations or environment and behavior research. As the field developed and evolved, the scholars developed niche research areas in multiple research topics just to give an example to the variety, research topics including spatialization in housing, workplaces, learning environments, other institutional settings such as museums, libraries, prisons, evidence-based research in healthcare buildings, studies on place attachment, specializations on spaces for children and older groups, studies on communication, nonverbal communication, post-occupancy evaluation, studies on livable and sustainable cities, physical activity and urban design, mental health benefits of green and blue spaces, studies on identity, wayfinding, participatory planning are just some of the examples. And I feel like I'm not covering all that is important to mention here, but I hope this gives an idea. So given the breadth of these studies that fall under environmental psychology for this lecture, I chose a few concept theories that influence the foundations of this field, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce those. So to begin with, these two concepts, people and environment, are both comprehensive terms. With environment, we refer to physical and built environment, buildings we live, work, learn, receive care and treatment, buildings we play, in which we play. We refer to spaces in between buildings in which we spend time, sometimes for which we fight for, whether for a more equal and democratic society or for healthier livelihoods. The term also encompasses natural environments, whether they are shaped and designed by people, or whether it is about view or access to some untouched wilderness as much as it may exist. So two concepts, behavior settings and affordances, are cornerstones in the development of environmental psychology. Prior to the development of these concepts, research in psychology was limited to experimental and laboratory settings, where parameters that affect behavior were artificially controlled and isolated. And at some point, two researchers, Baker and Gibson, emphasized the role of the setting or physical environment as an important element that researchers need to pay attention, that exerts influence on people's psychology, behavior, and perception. They and those who built on these concepts argued that if we observe people in their natural settings and in real situations instead of in laboratory settings, we can better understand the complexity of how the mind works and get a picture that is much closer to the reality. So behavior settings, first elaborated by Barker, refer to places that accommodate certain types of activities and functions for a certain group of people. So in that sense, for example, a school versus home versus workplaces are each distinct behavior settings because of the type of activities that take place in those settings. Activities being learning in school settings versus cooking and sleeping at home versus working in workplaces. And the concept of affordances communicates the idea that whether users in a setting can directly or indirectly perceive the affordances or not, so independent of ability to perceive, physical characteristics of a setting enables or prevents certain actions, activities, or needs. So this can be best understood with the example of hiding places. A visual barrier in a place may afford ability to hide, or in contrast, open uninterrupted views can provide ability to prevent crime and increase safety because of the ability to surveil. Another foundational work is from Amos Rapoport. He emphasized cultural aspects of the built environment and processes of nonverbal communication through built environment. He argued that vernacular architecture responded successfully to their environment and conveyed cultural meaning through nonverbal communication. Therefore, buildings served as a cultural artifact of a homogeneous group, reflecting their beliefs, environmental conditions, and also their ways of life. He also critiqued that this sort of culturally responsive design disappeared in modern societies since pluralistic societies favored universal design ideals. So with nonverbal communication, he argued that buildings can carry a certain meaning. They are designed with meaning. On one end of the communication, cultural values and ideas are encoded into the physical form. And on the other end of the communication, observers can decode these messages and interpret cultural meaning of the built environment. His elaboration of nonverbal communication is very much applicable today. For instance, when we think of recent studies in everyday urbanism and how ethnic minority groups personalize and decorate their spaces to effectively maintain their identity in public sphere and communicate it to the rest of the public. With hard architecture, tight spaces, hard architecture, and how to humanize it. That was the title of Robert Sommer's book. He criticized the ideologies behind the institutions of prison and ideas of punishment through architecture of prison. He questioned to what extent creating degrading and dehumanized places, in fact, would have a chance to improve criminal behavior or benefit the rest of the society. He argued that hard architecture is designed to be strong, controlled, and it resists human imprint. He examined how everyday spaces such as classrooms, parks, and public housing embody similar hard architecture elements. For instance, he argued that buildings with impermeable surfaces, facades, such as like imagine a building, an office where you cannot see what's happening inside, or classrooms with linear seating, so you are told to sit in a certain way and you cannot change the seating, cementing riverbeds, providing low quality finishes in public housing, or playgrounds that are surrounded with mesh fencing are primarily built for ease of maintenance, but not necessarily for humans. He argued that ability to leave human imprint on one's surrounding, or in today's terms, what we refer to as guerrilla architecture or appropriation, would be one of the primary elements of soft and humanized architecture. Another important concept that informs a lot of research still today is the concept of proxemics. So the need to understand and elaborate personal space, how these affect stress and well-being, and how we arrange spaces around us according to personal space needs, led to the development of series of foundational concepts about personal space. So for example, this is from an anthropological research. Anthropologist Edward Hall was influential in conceptualization of space and time as cultural elements and as elements of non-linguistic cultural communication. So he coined the term proxemics. The term refers to the ways in which people use space and set up comfortable distances in their relationship with others. So I want you to imagine if you were in a classroom right now, sharing the same physical space, it would work wonderfully. But you can try to imagine what kind of distance feels comfortable for you when you are standing next to another person that you are not very much familiar. And if you were asked to get a step closer, it would start become uncomfortable. And if you were asked to face each other, it would start becoming even more uncomfortable. So proxemics is relating to this idea. So Edward Hall asserted that proxemics is a spatial concept, and it is one of the countless aspects of culture like language, artifacts, performance, and rituals are. He said, just like people from different cultures speak different languages, they also occupy different sensory worlds and norms in relation to space and time. So for instance, most of us may be able to relate to cultural differences in relation to what is an acceptable distance between people in public spaces in Western societies versus Eastern societies, or in relation to acceptable norms regarding being on time versus being a few minutes late in different cultures and geographies. And his two influential books focus on such cultural differences in regards to use of time and space. So he explained proxemics in 4 levels based on the type of interactions between people. So in other words, these are comfortable distance zones that people like to maintain in different situations. He argued that for intimate interactions, people need to be in closer proximity, and it is acceptable. So this can apply to relations in a family or caregiving situations in a healthcare setting. Personal interaction is the next level. For instance, it could apply to personal conversations with friends. Next 2 levels are proxemics in social spaces, like a meeting or gathering in workplaces with people you know, or at least you are acquainted with. And the 4th one is distances we find appropriate in public spaces when people have no affinity or no relationship to one another or no need to converse with one another. So moving on to another concept, it is privacy. A great deal of research focused on and still focuses on understanding the need of privacy in different settings. So this research also looks at different types of privacy needs and positive outcome of adequate privacy measures and negative outcome of lack of privacy. Researchers working in this area highlight different types of privacy, such as auditory privacy, being the need to protect confidentiality of information or preventing being overheard when not desired. I can add to that from my research in healthcare settings. Another level of privacy people need is not to be exposed to other people's health problems visually or also in terms of information-wise. So it's not just protecting your own privacy, but hearing other people's private situation can be uncomfortable as well. Visual privacy, the need to ensure not to be visible to other people and having private space and time for certain activities. Autonomy is another aspect of privacy. It is the need to establish autonomy over private space and interactions. The level of privacy need, how it is established and how it is communicated, and the built environment measures to protect privacy very much differs between building environments, different building settings, activity types, and also between cultures. So studies in workplaces, for instance, confirms that regulation of personal space varies according to people's personality traits, such as levels of anxiety or sensitivity to one's invasion of personal space. Studies in healthcare settings show that communication between patients and medical staff lasts longer and might be more engaged when there is adequate amount of privacy provided. And in contrast, lack of environmental measures to protect privacy may result in feelings of loss of dignity, increased anxiety, stress, and also not fully disclosing medical information. So privacy in healthcare settings and in nursing homes, for instance, is a topic that is actively debated, given that there are always many trades-off between sharing a room versus having privacy in a single room. So these foundational concepts continue to be relevant and inform ongoing research questions. Moving on to territoriality. So all these basic personal space concepts explain foundational environment and behavior needs, and they're also very much interrelated to one another. For instance, invasion of private space and private property may result in stress and even in aggressive reactions, including violence. As a result, people are known to protect their territorial areas by means of spatial modification and territorial control. So territoriality explains the notion of laying claim and securing a given spatial area or an object. We mark an area as our own so that we have control over unwanted interaction and keep other individuals at a comfortable distance. Manifestations of territoriality can take place in a variety of ways and can be observed in a variety of settings. Altman, for example, proposed that there are 3 broad categories for territories. Private places such as home being the primary territories, semi-public places such as backyards being the secondary territories, and places such as public parks being the tertiary territories. So one's need to control their immediate surrounding may stem from the universal need of and right to privacy. A basic example of territoriality around a private place would be a fence around a home that controls access, but provides visibility, like you see in the picture on the left. And in some cases, demarcation of private area could be more emphasized. For instance, an affluent gated community right next to an impoverished community could demonstrate their territorial control by fully separating themselves from the surrounding area with high walls, security cameras, and by creating an inaccessible and hidden private enclave. So without going into the problems about this, this is another example of territorial control. Territoriality studies in public spaces show that territorial control is not always necessarily fixed in time or materialized, but through architecture, furniture settings, personalization of space, occupation and appropriation, and through use of bodies, territoriality can be constantly negotiated. It's a concept that can be fluid. It can change between day and night. In the same public space, like in a plaza, there can be multiple territories anytime, like those of homeless people, those of chess players, or children, or informal sellers. So this concept of territoriality is a multi-layered and constantly reproduced and negotiated concept. In classroom settings, a study that analyzed students' seat choices in relation to their personality types, based on asking them statements that demonstrated to what extent they care about territoriality by using statements like you see in the slides. I get annoyed when I have to sit in a different seat, or I like to get to the class early to get the same seat each day. So these are some examples of statements that demonstrate to what extent people are highly territorial or not. So this study found that highly territorial types chose sitting on the sides and edges of the classroom more clearly in square layouts, and in other layouts, the choice was less clear. So it may have something to do with avoiding avoiding interaction with others. So choosing minimal interaction or being closer to the edge may give more of a sense of control over their surroundings. So these are some options that explain this behavior. Same study also showed that female students were more likely to claim a particular seat than male students, regardless of the type of the seating arrangement. So these kind of studies show the importance of personality and gender factors, which play a role in how people negotiate shared spaces with others and regulate their emotional and sensory well-being. And in turn, we can know what kind of spatial arrangements would work better for different types of people. So the importance of environmental psychology in architectural design and urban design is that these kind of studies are important in understanding how to design spaces that would create more user-friendly and comfortable settings with less tensions, less aggression, less anxiety, and with overall increased well-being and sometimes even increased productivity. The negative consequences do not only affect the individual user necessarily, they also affect the businesses and organizations. So studies in workplaces argue that creating generic spaces may provide cost savings, but on the other hand, inability to claim one's own personal space may create dissatisfaction and lower employee commitment for those who are sensitive about territorial control. And studies show that certain personality types will react strongly if their territorial area is frequently invaded, or if they don't have a fixed space or ability to personalize, which is one of the ways to mark boundaries, meaning that hot desk arrangements may not work for everyone. So while I'm not covering this in this lecture, I'll just plug it in here, that there's a lot of research that is looking into measurable social and business outcomes that demonstrate the relationship between productivity in workplaces, or learning performance in schools, or increased attention in people with ADHD in relation to physical environment variables, which can be architectural design characteristics, but it can also be environmental elements such as light, noise, and temperature, or access to nature, or views of nature. So these are just a few more specializations, examples of few more specializations under environment and behavior studies, with direct design implications and well-being implications, and also with implications for management and organizational studies. So after the plugin, I'm going back to the basic concepts, and that is the last personal space concept that I'm going to introduce, that is crowding. So when these basic needs such as privacy, territoriality, and control are not met, that might result in psychological distress. And crowding refers to a negative experience about perceived density. The difference between density and crowding is that density is an objective measurement. It refers to a ratio between number of people and square footage of an area, such as land or footprint of a building. And crowding, on the other hand, is a psychological response to perceived density. It may be characterized with excessive stimulation from social sources, or stimulus overload resulting from unfamiliar or inappropriate social contacts, and constraints on personal space, privacy, and control. There are multiple documented negative effects of crowding. These include increased anxiety, cognitive failure, increased blood pressure, and even negative effects on quality of child-parent relationships and academic achievement also. So having said all this gloomy negative outcomes, studies also recognize people's ability to adapt and find ways to combat with environmental stressors, such as avoiding interpersonal interactions. And of course, architectural adaptations is one of those ways. So overall, we can conclude that one of the major requirements for successful and long-lasting architecture, or for urban spaces, is to understand and meet user needs. And as the society is always changing, demographics are shifting, our norms, cultural norms and expectations are changing. And as there are new and increased amount of diagnosis of psychological or neurological conditions, that means there's always room and need for more research on these topics. So I have this slide because it illustrates why designing with users in mind is important. The negative effect of built environment on people in most cases might be subtle, or may require a collection of evidence and research. For instance, in a workplace, unless you know all coworkers are suffering from headache, you may not immediately realize that indoor air quality might be the cause. or you may not attribute conflict between coworkers to lack of territorial division or control. But sometimes extreme examples like this one demonstrate how architectural design can deliberately ignore or foreshadow basic human needs and activity requirements for the sake of aesthetically pleasing design. So Zaha Hadid's fire station is a good example to illustrate this point. This was a commissioned building. It is an amazingly impressive avant-garde architecture, very dramatic and exciting. But the characteristic design elements, such as the narrow angles and tilted walls, play with human perception. So this is like one of the basic, being, when I say play with human perceptions, it causes dizziness and results in seasickness effect. So it is like one of the basic things, like being able to stand in a space without having the effect of vertigo. So when a building is supposed to serve firemen who needed to respond in case of emergencies and act quickly and get ready and get down from the pole, a setting that literally makes them dizzy doesn't exactly serve the purpose. Eventually, this building did not function as a fire station. It was converted into an exhibition space to exhibit designer chair collections. And this is one extreme example, but there are many everyday buildings that we use that fail to create functioning, comfortable, and sometimes safe designs because of lack of understanding of the specific users' psychology, cognitive needs, or physical and medical needs, and mental needs also. For instance, an older patient having difficulty finding their way in a hospital while already unwell or stressed or confused doesn't serve the purpose, but it is the experience of many hospital users still today. So I'm going to conclude it here with this example. I hope this lecture with like a wide range of ideas and concepts were in some way meaningful and inspirational for you. And I'm happy to take your questions, and I'm also leaving here my email in case you would like to ask questions later or discuss research in environment and behavior studies. Thank you for listening.